Warm welcome to this lecture series on organizational behavior. We are going to look at a chapter called Group Dynamics. I am Dr. MP Ganesh from IIT Hyderabad. So this is going to be the outline of the chapter. We will define what are groups and we also define what are teams. And we'll look at the differences between groups and teams. And also we'll look at different types of teams and we will look at more specifically about how teams evolve over a period of time or how work groups evolve over a period of time from the group development perspective point of view. And at the end we will look at two important problems work teams encounter, which is free riding social loafing and groupthink. Okay, so work groups especially have been very common in organizational context very recently. Especially organizations which are very flat in structure, they use group format or work team format extensively in managing their work or distributing their work. So there are more and more groups which do different functions in organizations. So it becomes very important to understand group dynamics in organization. When we talk about groups, what are groups? In fact, the term groups may apply in other contexts also. Like apart from work groups, there can be interest groups. There can be a classroom setup can also be a group. Probably a fan club. There might be groups. So there are many forms of groups. So what is a group? A group, in a very simple term, can be defined as collection of people coming together and share certain goals, and they also communicate with each other over a period of time, and they are relatively smaller in number compared to organizations, so that they may communicate with each other personally. Okay, so collection of people sharing common goals is very similar to the idea of organization. Organizations are very big, groups are smaller units of organizations. But sometimes if the organizations are small, let's say if it is a startup or if it is a small organization, a micro or a small enterprise, micro, small, medium enterprise, there can be very few people in that organization. So it can also be a group and also is an organization. There are few key terms which has to be focused in this definition. The first area of focus is the size of the organization. So when size of the group should be small enough so that they should be able to talk to each other personally. So typically a group's size will be around 6 to 8 people or maximum 10 or 15 people. So beyond that, it becomes difficult for people to communicate one-on-one or understand each other on a one-on-one basis. And also, if the group sizes are very big, then it can lead to subgroup formation. If there are more than, let's say, 10 or 12 people, there will be smaller groups which will emerge from the large group, and that may affect the larger groups' dynamics, work dynamics. So the smallest group can be 3 people. Because if it is less than 3, then it becomes a dyad. Only 2 people, the dynamics are very less. It becomes something called a dyad. 3 people, the dynamics becomes more interesting, more rich. And if it is more than 4 people, 4 to 8 people, it's an ideal size for any group. Especially for the condition that they should be able to know each other and communicate with each other at a personal level. Okay. So this is a group. And also another important element we have to focus is shared goals. When you say shared goals, they should have a common goal. There are 2 ways of understanding shared goals. Either it is a common goal or goals which are interdependent on each other. When I say common goal, there is one goal, all of us should work together to achieve that common goal. This is shared goal. A common goal. Interdependent goals are, each one of them have different goals, but they have to work together so that their goals are mutual, they can help each other in a mutually beneficial way. Okay, sometimes the goals can overlap, sometimes the goal may not overlap, but most of the times to call a collection of people as groups, you need to have overlapping goals at least. The best possible scenario is common goal, or otherwise the goals should overlap with each other. Overlap means part of my goal is the other person's responsibility in the team, in the group, and his or her goal partly I am also responsible for that. Okay, so this element is called interdependency. Interdependency means they depend on each other for fulfilling their goals. Okay, so these are the two concepts I want you to focus on. One, size or person to person communication, which depends on the size of the group. Two, the interdependency of goals, shared goals. Okay, so this is a definition of a group. But why do people form groups? So like I said, groups can exist even outside organizational context. It's not necessarily groups are restricted to organizations. There can be any form of groups. So let's say you just walk around in the street, and suddenly there is an event. People come together and watch the event, they discuss. Let's say the event is there for 3-4 hours. Okay, so people can form cliques. They become, they exchange communication, they talk. So over a period of time, you can call it as a group also. It's a temporary group, but it can be a group also. Okay, so groups can exist even outside the organization. It can be temporary groups, and it can be it can be informal groups also. Okay, having said that, why people form groups? Because they form groups because there are certain, to fulfill their needs. In fact, as human beings, we have the need to form groups in terms of some similarity. Let's say in a classroom context, you will try to identify yourself with some people based on your religious background or ethnic background or interest background, and you form groups. You sit together, you become friends, you become cliques. Okay, cliques means small groups. So it's a basic need of an individual to form groups, and sometimes we form groups to fulfill certain needs also. More specifically, task accomplishment. People come together to fulfill a certain task. For example, like I said, you are walking in the street, suddenly there is a small accident. People come together and help that person. Or there is some like I said, some event, there is some circus or something going on, some entertainment going on in the street, or there is a small accident. Like I said, people come together and try to help each other or try to communicate with each other. Okay, so it can be a task accomplishment also. In most cases, groups are formed to accomplish a certain task, common goal. The second reason why people form groups is security. They feel secure. Let's say if you're going in a train, you tend to talk to your neighbors. You tend to share things with them in terms of your experiences, in terms of you help them and things like that. Why you do it? Because reciprocity. If you form groups, it gives you a sense of security. Groups also helps people feel affiliated to something. Affiliated means, like I said earlier, as human beings, we are social beings. We have the need to interact with someone, need to identify ourselves with a larger group so that we feel accepted as a person. So friendship groups are based on this need. As humans, we have the need to get affiliated, get attached to a larger group. So groups can form because of varied reasons like this. So what is a team? In fact, the word team and groups are used interchangeably in many textbooks or even in research papers. Even when we talk normally in conversations, we use this term team and group interchangeably. But there is a difference. The major difference is, in fact, team is a subset of group. We can call team as one form of a group. Okay, it is similar to groups, but in some ways they are different as well. So in what ways teams are different from groups? One important aspect of team is also a group of people, they are working together, but they cooperate. When I say cooperate, they help each other. Okay, groups may not necessarily should have cooperation between the team members. Like I said, let's say you are walking in the street, there is some event in the street, something happening in the street or in the road. People come together, but they may not necessarily help each other. They may work together to achieve something common, but they may not necessarily help each other. Okay, so only when people help each other, when I say cooperation means helping each other, or trying to understand each other's needs, change their behavior based on the other person's need. All those things are called cooperation. So only when people cooperate as a unit, it becomes a team. So in other words, or in other ways, we can say teams are more cohesive than groups. Cohesive means they are closely knit. They communicate very closely. They help each other more. They establish clear boundaries between them and others. So teams, they have clear-cut boundaries in terms of identity. They know we are a team. When outsider has to join this team, there are certain conditions. And also people leaving a team and identifying themselves with the other team, many times it becomes difficult. The team will try to have their own members to have their own team identity. So in a way, teams are, like I said earlier, are closed units than groups. Okay, and also, like I said, teams are special type of groups in which people work interdependently. If you remember, I used this term interdependency in the earlier slide also. Interdependency means they depend on each other, they help each other, they should be supportive to each other so that they will achieve the goal. Groups may not necessarily, people should help each other, and they may not necessarily be depending on each other for achieving their goals. Okay, so there is interdependency. So in fact, interdependency is what creates cooperation within team members. And also the teams are more structured in nature. When I say structured, there are clear-cut prescription in terms of what each member has to do, how they have to behave, what are their roles. So teams are more formal than groups. And like I said, work team is an interdependent collection of individuals who share responsibility so that they achieve specific goals for their organization. So in many situations, teams are considered to be specific to work. So teams are more structured and they are more specific in terms of work context. Groups can be of any context, may not necessarily be formal or structured. So in fact, this sums up the difference between teams and groups. Like I said earlier, the distinction is not clear cut. People use teams and groups interchangeably. Even academicians, if you see a research paper, the same paper will say teams, groups interchangeably, but there is a difference. Okay, like I said, teams are in work context. Teams are more structured. When I say structured, there is more formalization in teams. Everything is like clearly written down. Each member's roles are defined clearly. There is a hierarchy established. When I say hierarchy, there must be an assigned team leader, and each member, they have different levels of power and things like that. And also teams have more accountability because teams are in work context and they are structured. Obviously, they are accountable to fulfilling their task. Their accountability in terms of fulfilling the task is very high compared to a group. And also teams have high levels of synergy. When I say synergy means the sum is larger than the collection of individual team members. What I mean to say is, individually members will have certain level of capacity. When they come together, because teams make people feel their interdependency, they tend to cooperate more, and the collective effort will lead to better results compared to individual effort. Okay, so collectively when they come together, they may produce excellent results compared to the results which they can get working as individuals. So this is what is synergy. The collective effort gives more result than the individual effort when they summed up. Okay, so teams are usually part of larger organizations. Like I said earlier, in work context, we call them teams. And also every member have assigned roles depending on their knowledge, skill and ability. And usually teams are limited in size. Groups, since they are informal in nature, they can be a large size, but teams usually are 8 to 15 members. But again, in organizations, even large groups are called as teams, like IT companies. Even large groups, they call them as teams, but technically they are not teams, because if there are teams, there should not be sub-teams. Okay, a team will not have sub-teams. A large group may have subgroups, but a work team will not have sub-teams. There might be smaller roles or smaller tasks broken down in a team and given to groups of people or smaller units of people in the team. But you cannot strictly call them as small groups, subgroups in teams. Teams usually are one unit. Groups can have smaller units within. Okay, I hope you understood this idea. Okay, so teams can be of different types. In organization, there are different types of teams exist. Production groups, where in an assembly line there will be many people working and there will be one supervisor. Many of them are, they are very less freedom to decide. Only the team leader decides, the supervisor decides. So it's like a production team. Service teams are like airline attendant teams, crews, maintenance groups, customer service, sales teams, all those things. Management teams are teams which are at the management level, like middle level managers. They form a team and they make decisions. They are like sometimes board of governors can also be called as a team. Project teams are usually cross-functional. When I say cross-functional, people from different backgrounds, different departments come together. And also the difference between other forms of teams and project teams is, project teams have a deadline. Other teams like management teams or production groups, service groups, they are continuous. They might be continuous in nature. Project groups or project teams, when they have assigned timeline and they have assigned task. Once they fulfill their project, they may dismantle. And usually, like I said, there is a time limit for fulfilling their project. Action and performance teams are short duration in nature, and sometimes they can be very temporary also. For example, orchestra, music orchestra, or a tactical attack team in the army, where the team is formed for a specific purpose and they will perform it, and after that the team is dismantled, which is similar to project teams, but the time duration might be even less, and also the objective might be very, very specific. Advisory teams are group of experts coming together. They help in terms of making decisions for the organization. But again, the difference between this and other teams is the level of interdependency might be very less between the members. Self-managing teams are groups where they have complete freedom on what they can do in terms of selecting the goals, in terms of assigning roles to each other, in terms of forming hierarchy within the group. So it's like complete freedom in terms of what they can do, which is called self-managing teams. In fact, nowadays in creative organizations, self-managing teams have become more popular, because the top level management will not say this person is the leader or this is what you have to do. So people out of their own interests in organizations, they come together because they identify a potential problem or a business opportunity within the organization, and they form a group and they decide what they want to do. They assign their own leaders, they assign their own deadlines, they assign evaluation criteria in terms of whether they achieve the goals or not. So everything becomes their own responsibility. So self-managing teams can be called as a very ideal form of teams, very highly matured members, they will come together and form self-managing team. Many times they are like people with a lot of experience and expertise in their own areas. Okay, so the purpose of giving this list is, even though teams, the definition says they are interdependent people achieving a common goal, working together and cooperating with each other, there can be different kinds of teams, and the level of freedom they have as a team might change across these types of teams, and also the level of boundedness. When I say boundedness, how close are they, will change across these types of teams. For example, a self-managing team need to be highly bounded than maybe a production group or a project team, because project team, they are cross-functional. Cross-functional means they also belong to a certain department, and people from different departments come together and form a project. So their accountability is there for their department and also to the team. Okay, so they are not that bounded, because their identity is like divided in terms of, in project teams, one identity is they belong to a department, second identity is they belong to that particular team. So in that sense, the boundaries of the team is not very strict. But self-managing teams, their boundaries might be very, very strict, because they are very focused. They have to decide what they have to do within their group, so they are very cohesive. Similarly, in advisory groups, interdependency is less compared to maybe self-managing groups or project groups. So even within the idea of teams, there might be different types with different qualities and criterias. Okay, so I'll stop here. In the next section, we will talk about how groups evolve over a period of time, how work teams evolve over a period of time. Till then, take care. We'll meet in the next lecture.